Welcome to the Relationship Cycle with Jorge and Nelsa, where we discuss dating and other significant relationships. Are you a fan? Tag us and share our show in your IG or Facebook pages in order to win a $50 gift card to a restaurant on us for Valentine's Day. You must be 18 and up to be entered to win, and the winner will be announced on February 5th, 2022.
Hello.
All right, Jorge, we are back in a new year. Poppy, hope the holidays were good to you.
Yeah, it was good. Holidays can be a little stressful, but a lot of relaxing time, a lot of time with the family. And most importantly, I got hooked up by Santa and I got some homemade tamales. So all in all, it was a great, great holiday.
Awesome. I can say the same. It was real peaceful and pleasant and very restful for a change. And I really didn't mind that at all. But I got all that rest because we're going to need it for the show today. Oh, my goodness. We've got such an exciting topic. You know, we promised our listeners that we were going to keep it real talk and that we were going to discuss things that a lot of people maybe had on their minds, but were afraid to maybe explore on their own. And so tonight we are going to talk with a guest about BDSM. And so, Poppy, go ahead and introduce our guest tonight. Why don't you?
Yes. So Jessica is a friend of mine, and she is a sub, and she is very familiar with the BDSM world, and she practices as well. And she's been involved in your dom sub relationships, which is what we're kind of going to focus on. Now, just to clarify for the audience, so a dom is short for dominant, and sub would be short for submissive. And I would say, in my opinion, the dom sub relationships tend to be probably the more popular ones that you will see in the BDSM world, even though there is a plethora of dynamics and relationships and things that people will practice and get involved in. But I would say that the dom sub is probably the more common. Think 50 Shades of Grey.
Okay. And let's make sure people know, because I don't want to assume that people know what BDSM stands for. So it's the letters BDSM, and it stands for bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, and sadism and masochism. So that's the full name when you hear BDSM. And one of the definitions that I've researched talks about is a sexual BDSM sex is a term for a variety of sexual practices that include bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, and control. And when you talk about the dominant versus the sub, which is what we're discussing today, it talks about one partner taking on a more dominant role during sex while the other is more submissive. And this is not a topic to listen to with your children. Let's go ahead and get that out of the way first. This is definitely one for adults only. And there may be triggers in this conversation. So we want to make sure that people are aware of that, because it can be very graphic. But our goal is not to make it just sensational or anything, but we really wanted to educate people who may have real questions, who may be very curious, and who may not have a real outlet, really, Poppy, to have this conversation. This is a very intimate topic. And so being able to have somebody on who can talk with us about it and help educate our listenership is what the two of us really wanted to do with the show. So we hope that you guys will get out of it what you need tonight. So we'll turn it over and invite Jessica on into the conversation. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I just want to add that I feel like the BDSM world has kind of, really gotten mainstream into our society. Although I feel like there's still a lot of misconceptions with that world, because I feel like a lot of people, generally people who aren't familiar with it, or quote unquote your vanilla people, when they think BDSM, they think whips and chains. And that is, listen, don't get me wrong, that's part of it, definitely. But that world has so many different things and so many different, avenues that you can explore. And even though it can absolutely be about whips and chain, it can also be erotic, it can be sensual, and it can be romantic as well. So, we want to try to kind of shed some light on, this dynamic of the Dom sub relationship that has become so popular, and, why they're making so many movies about it.
Right. So Jessica, what led you, that's one of the questions I had. What led you to this particular world and that particular role as a submissive?
Um, I guess maybe, when I first moved to Charlotte, I mean, I was always interested in the kink scene, even as a teenager. But when I moved to North Carolina, um, back in 2006, that's when I really got interested. I went to a club one night, just to try to make some friends because I was brand new. And they invited me out to this new event. And I went to the event, and not only was it just an event, it was a fetish event. So it was just a fetish party. And I was familiar with some of it already. And when I started making friends there, then I was really engrossed into the few friends were doms. There was a dungeon upstairs, so I learned a lot about that. I was still trying to figure out who I was. I was just 19 at the time, so I was still trying to figure out who I was, what I liked, and it came to it maybe 10 years later. Finally figured out who I was, because it can take time to figure out who you are and what you like. You can go through from being a sub to a dom. And then, of course, there's a switch, which means that you can be both dominant and submissive. Um, and at first I thought it was that, and it came down to it that when you have a relationship with the dominant, then you finally figure out who you are after communicating, because I think communication is the biggest thing. That is the key to a dom sub relationship. You find out everything about them, they find out everything about you. They help you figure out who you are once they're confident in who they are as well. So
Mm.
Oh,
communication is
interesting.
the biggest thing. Yes.
Now, Jessica, I want to ask, and thank you for kind of, giving us, kind of painting the picture on how you kind of got involved in the lifestyle. And I want to ask now, I do want to clarify this. Now, there's different ways of practicing BDSM. Like some people live the lifestyle, and when they say live the lifestyle, that generally they live it 24/7. Like they wake up and they are still heavily involved in the life. Now, there are some people, uh, like myself, that enjoy it, but normally in the intimacy or in the bedroom. And, at the end of the day, you can enjoy it however you see fit to your lifestyle or to your personality or whatnot. So there is no right or wrong. It's just different ways of, enjoying it per se.
Right, right, which I agree with. There are people that definitely live the lifestyle. I've met one person in particular, in Florida, actually. One person, she's a sub. She lived it 24/7. And her dom, basically, she did work, but she would come home and there were rules that she had to follow. If she broke one of them, she would be disciplined. And some people do have it as a lifestyle. And sometimes it does help, not just, physically, but mentally and emotionally. Some subs like it when some people take control of their lives because some of them don't want to have control or simply can't do it. And having a dom does help. It just not only helps physically, but mentally, emotionally, it does really help. It can be therapeutic for some people.
That is deep. Now, I want to ask you something, Jessica, and let's kind of start diving into some of this. What are some of the characteristics that you find sexy in a dominant?
Good question, Poppy.
Well, that really depends on the person. Because every dom is different, so you have to know the person. But the constant trait that I like in every single one of them is straight discipline. If you don't do this, I'm going to discipline you. Something like that.
Okay.
Because there are subgenres of submissive, and one of them happens to be brat, and that's where I've come in.
I get it. Gotcha. Okay. That's
And
good.
what is
Yes.
So,
a brat, Jessica, for those who may be listening who aren't familiar with those terms?
Um, I will push buttons, and I'm going to keep pushing them until I can't push them anymore.
So it is a
that
brat, like we know a
that
brat.
is a brat.
literally a brat. So it's like a brat, but in the bedroom, in the intimacy department, so to speak. Okay, that's fair.
Yes.
Um, I would say, so let's say somebody who's maybe on the fence, or maybe somebody who's been vanilla for the majority of their life, and they want to try to explore BDSM, or they want to maybe get involved with a dom. What would be some advice that you would give them?
Some advice. I know that, talking face to face to people, especially your friends, if they're all quote unquote vanilla as well, it's going to be difficult. Because, people do look down upon this lifestyle, and they do think that it's taboo. Even though it's still becoming more normal by the day, but it's still a tough topic. So the best advice I can give is you can try to go out to some of these clubs or meetups, excuse me, you know, book, on social media. There's also a website called FetLife that you can join, and they have groups and meetups as well on there. Now, of course, be cautious because you're meeting people from the internet in person, but still, there that is possible. If you just want to talk to somebody just over the internet, like through messaging or something, that's always good too. You can get advice that way as well.
Mm,
So I just have one question, Jessica. You brought up the um, part about meeting somebody over internet, but what what safety guidelines should a person who is not familiar with the lifestyle, like what sort of things help keep you safe? Like in my mind, you're saying, you're a brat, you want to be punished, but what keeps you safe from somebody taking punishment and going too far?
If it's somebody new, I will actually sit down and have a talk with them first. I need to know you. I need to know your expressions, your attitude, your behavior, everything before we can dive right into that. Harmless flirting is one thing, but getting to know someone who wants to dominate you is another. Because
Hmm.
there are people out there that take dominating to the extreme, and it's just not good. So definitely sit down, have a conversation, go on a couple dates if you need to. Make sure you know the person. It does take time. It does not happen overnight. I do want to make that clear. So I mean, so when you somebody off the internet, if you go on these dates off the internet, then definitely meet in a public place where there's lots of people around. Typically, I like to do it in the daytime and not at night, so that way it's in broad daylight, everybody can see what you're wearing or anything like that. So
Hmm.
that's typically my safe thing. And always let somebody know where you are, so somebody that personally, let them know where you are,
Just like if
because
you were
anything
on
could
a date
happen.
with anybody else, right?
Yes.
yeah, and listen, so speaking on this, as far as from a safety standpoint, one thing that I always tell people who are maybe curious about exploring this lifestyle, or who are seeking a dom, is that you should never submit to anyone. I don't care who they are. If you do not feel safe with them, and if you do not feel that they have their best interest at heart for you. Because if you have any doubt or if you are unsure, then you should not be submitting to that individual anyways. Because
Absolutely.
uh, with this, with this kind of intimacy and with this kind of things that you're going to be doing in the bedroom, as far as with the dom sub and the BDSM and the impact scenes, you're going to be very vulnerable. And there's going to be moments where you might be either with handcuffs or tied up, and the worst feeling that you want to have is that, oh my God, I'm tied up and I don't know if this dude's gonna untie me, or I don't know if this dude's crazy or not. So you don't ever want to get to a point like that. So that's why it's very important that when you do take that step of impact
Mhm.
play and intimacy in the bedroom, you want to feel that, hey, this person is looking out for my safety and my well-being, and I feel comfortable being open and vulnerable with them.
Right.
Um,
And I fully agree with that, especially which is why it's important to know your dom. You want to make sure that you do feel safe with them, and you want to make sure that they do have your best interest at heart, because if they don't, then I would not suggest to continue with that. If you do not feel 100% safe, I would not suggest to go through with it.
I was looking on WebMD about some safety advice, special considerations, and one word jumped out at me completely. And I want to ask you about this, Jessica, but the word consent. Um, Making sure everybody knows what's going on, what the boundaries are. Uh, do you formalize consent in
Yes.
the and in what way? Like how do you make sure things are clear? Do you have a safe word? Um, how do you go about that?
Yes. So consent is actually everything in a DS relationship, especially in the bedroom. When you get down to it, then consent, the dom really needs the submissive's consent to do anything. So consent, some people have contracts, like written contracts. Some people do verbal. Some people have a safe word. Me personally, I actually have a safe word. And it depends on the dom. I've had one dom where I had to do a written contract because I didn't trust him enough. And
Mm,
then yes, so I had to do one. So, which is why it's important to know your dom. And this is just coming from experience, because I did have a bad experience before. So, yeah, so it's always important to know your dom. But consent is everything, which is where communication also falls in line. Excuse me. You want to make sure that your dom has your consent, but you also need to make sure that you have your dom's consent as well, because there may be things that you could do that your dom may not like, or there may be things that your dom does that you may not like. So
So in
consent and
my
communication go hand in hand.
so in my experience, when I've practiced some of the dom sub relationships that I've experienced in my past, before you even enter the bedroom, you have to have those discussions of what someone has as a trigger, what someone is comfortable with, what they're basically, you want to ask, what are your hard limits, point blank.
Yes.
And when somebody asks, hey, what's your hard limits and what's your boundaries, then you need to state them as clearly as possible, and that person, he, she, or whomever, they need to respect that. And if they do not respect that, then that is not someone that you need to be involved with in any form or capacity, because that is one of the pillars of a DS relationship, between a dom and a sub, is respecting boundaries, good communication, having trust, and of course looking out for each other's well-being, just like you would in any regular relationship. Like that, those things are just core values that are applicable with any type of romantic relationship.
Yes, I agree 100%.
And the one mistake that a lot of subs can make is that they give total control to a dom. And me personally, this is just my personal opinion. Whenever you give someone too much power, usually people tend to abuse too much power. And it's important to have checks and balances. And one thing that I want to make perfectly clear to anyone who considers their self submissive or wants to explore their sub side is that at the end of the day, the sub has the most power, because a dom cannot be a dom without a sub. So your voice and your opinion absolutely matters, and you do have input. So don't feel that you're powerless or that you don't have a voice. Like, that is not a healthy dom sub relationship.
Yes,
Jessica,
that's
any
absolutely
last
correct.
words of advice for our listeners before we wrap up?
The main thing, if you're exploring the lifestyle, whether you're a dom or sub, just know yourself and then get to know your dom or sub. Please be safe out there. Consent and communication is everything. Without consent and communication, there is no trust. You
Mm.
will not have a healthy DS relationship.
You know, we could be talking about any relationship right now, couldn't we?
I mean,
Like,
listen,
just some excellent advice.
a lot of these things go hand in hand, and that's why a lot of people are, exploring the BDSM and the dom sub dynamics, because they all go hand in hand with any type of relationship.
And what we say all the time, Poppy, communication.
Oh, absolutely.
Jessica, thank you so much for being with us this evening on the call. And we really appreciate you sharing your experience with us and just helping to educate and enlighten our listenership. So, best of luck. Be safe out there with all that's going on in the world. But thank you so much for being with us again today.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. I really appreciate it. You guys have a good night, okay?
Thank you, Jessica. Have a good night.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you. All right.
And we'll be right back after this. Stay tuned, everybody. All right, we're back, everybody, and it's just been a very enlightening show so far. We hope that you're um, really getting some good information from our show tonight on BDSM. Just a reminder, this is not for children. So the second half of the show, we are going to hear a different perspective from the BDSM world. And Jorge, I think one of the things that was a big takeaway for me was how similar in communication and trust and knowing your partner, like, the activity may be different in the relationship, but those are um, pillars of a good relationship, of a good, healthy relationship, what we discussed with our sub, Jessica. So I'll be very curious to see in this second half of the show, we're going to have our Dom, Mr. Noir, come in and speak with us. So good stuff today.
Yeah, it was definitely a great interview. Jessica really, thanks, shout out to her for giving us her story and her point of view from a submissive perspective. And I would even say that communication and trust and respect becomes even more imperative in something like this, just because of some of the impact play that goes on with some of the BDSM scenes.
Right. And when you say that, tell our audience again, it's about educating. So we don't want to assume that anybody knows what that means. But when you say impact play, Poppy, what does that, what does that bring to mind?
Sometimes you can, use paddles, or sometimes you may use certain things to spank someone, or, maybe handcuffs, or even rope play, anything like that. And obviously, you're going to be vulnerable, and a little bit of pain may be involved. So having trust and respect is utterly important.
Well, I'm glad that we're having this discussion. Again, this may create triggers for people. So as we were discussing with Mr. Noir, our Dom, welcome to the show. We want to make sure that people are aware that our goal is to educate and to enlighten, to help you as you're exploring yourself, your partnership, and just to get some new information, because it's a new year, new you, and these may not be conversations that you can have easily with people in your circle. And so Poppy and I wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to bring to light things that we know people are curious about. So, Mr. Noir, thank you for joining us this evening. And the first question I think um, that we have for you is, what led you to being a dominant, to being a dom? What brought you to that?
Well, thank you guys for having me. I think that for me, it's always been something that was a part of who I was. There are some people who are into the role playing aspect, but for me, it's a part of my personality.
Okay, so that's a little different than. Did you always feel that sort of? Um, I guess, is it about power or control, or what would you say um, that aspect is in terms of being a dominant?
Oh, it's definitely about power. It's definitely about control, but it's also about creativity, coming up with different scenes and figuring out new ways to bring pleasure and in some situations some pain as well.
Now, Mr. Noir, so I'm curious, how much experience do you have in the BDSM world, and what would be some advice that you would give to anyone who is looking to get involved in this world, whether it be a dom or a sub?
Well, I was a bedroom player for some years before I officially got into the lifestyle. And what a bedroom player is I was someone who experimented with partners in my own personal life. And after a while, I realized that this was something that I really enjoyed, and it wasn't something that I could take or leave. So I decided to, at some point about 4 years ago, start, searching out different avenues of getting that experience. I think prior to that, I didn't realize that there was an actual community out there. I just thought that it was, something that you saw on adult films and that kind of thing. But once I realized that there were other people out there who were really doing this stuff, and I wasn't odd or weird or anything like that. Once I realized that there was a community out there, I started, I dipped my toe in and little by little started going to events. There are plenty of munches, and what a munch is basically where people in the lifestyle get together in vanilla spaces, whether it be a restaurant or, some other venue. And they get together and have conversations, have dinner, that kind of thing, and that may be a first foray into, interacting with people in the lifestyle, and then from there, there are definitely kink events, and depending on where you live, there may be local dungeons, or you may meet people that have private events. My recommendation for anyone getting into the lifestyle is just observe. It's not something that you have to just jump headfirst into, and I wouldn't recommend that. I would find as much information as you could on the subject, or whatever you're interested in. With Google and the internet, there's plenty of information out there, and just get out and talk to folks.
So we've we've used and heard this term several times, both in this conversation, Mr. Noir, and with our sub in the other segment. But the term vanilla, again, wanting to educate people. Everybody isn't in the lifestyle and maybe doesn't know what that means. But can you, from your perspective and from your experience, explain what vanilla is in the lifestyle, and how does a person go from being vanilla to um, more experienced without um, without feeling ashamed? I think, even just talking sometimes to your partner about wanting to venture out and do things more um, maybe creatively can be a hard conversation. So, you know, how can people learn to have a conversation around their sexuality and exploring their partnership without that shame that sometimes I think is very associated with doing anything outside the norm?
In terms of vanilla, you would just think about it as ice cream. Some would say that vanilla is not a flavor, and that is not the case. Vanilla is definitely a flavor. That flavor comes from the vanilla bean. Um, but a lot of people look at it as plain and boring, and that's not the case. It's a flavor on the spectrum. But you can get into your sprinkles and your toppings, or you could get into some Rocky Road butter pecan, that kind of thing. So it's a
Turtle
wide
tracks.
exactly, it's a wide range of what you can get into, what you like, what you want to try. It's not a one size fits all thing. In terms of um, talking with your partner, I think first you have to talk to yourself. Um, you have to figure out who you are and what you like, and go from there. I think it would become easier now. When you're dealing with another person, you can't control the outcome. You can't control their reactions and those types of things. And, the lines of communication, a lot of different variables have to be in place. But I would uh, recommend someone really focusing on themselves first and just getting a real understanding of, what they want to try, and figure out what their why is. Because honestly, I've had people ask me, how has being a lifestyle changed me? And it has changed me. I've learned a lot about myself, and I've also figured out a lot of my why. Why do I like control? Why do I like the power? Where does this stuff stem from? And once you start answering those questions, or even asking those questions and doing, you know, the research on it, you start to learn a lot about yourself.
I want to piggyback on that. So, for someone who is brand new or who's just curious, right? Like, I'll just speak on myself. Like, I started to hang out and network with people who had experience in the lifestyle. And I would just kind of have a beer and casual conversation, and you can learn from that. Also, podcast, YouTube, books, and like our sub mentioned earlier, even going to events. So there's ways to educate yourself and learn about it. But obviously there's certain things that you really won't know until you actually do it yourself. However, for example, with wax play, right? Wax play is considered when you use candle wax, and you use it on someone's body. However, if you do have to take some precaution with that, because that could burn certain parts of the skin. So that's why doing research, reading safety tips, all that is very important, because if you're not careful, yeah, you could burn yourself.
Yes, and uh, it- just with your example of wax play, most people think about wax play and you lighting a candle and just dripping the wax on, but the candles that are used in the lifestyle aren't your normal candles that you would buy at Target or Walmart. It's a
Exactly.
different.
Yeah, they're not Yankee Candle. They are specialized candles
Yes,
for the human skin, and some even glow in the dark. Some
yes.
have smells. Some have different colors. I
And
mean,
the wax burns at a lower temperature. Those household candles burn at a higher temperature, so you could actually burn someone with that wax. So but yeah, there's plenty of information out there. I would urge people to just do some research first, and like you said, talk to people, read, that kind of thing, because there is a such thing as sub frenzy, and that's where submissives, well, what are you into, or what do you want to try? Oh, I'll try anything. I whatever. And that's not the way to go about it.
Mm.
In the lifestyle, it is paramount that you have negotiation and consent, and you have to understand what you're consenting to. So you have to be educated from both sides. From a submissive side, you're uh, turning over or giving power to someone in that scene, or if it's longer, depending on what's negotiated. But you need to understand who that person is, what they're capable of, um, how much experience they have. So vetting is a important thing in terms of vetting who you want to interact with. If it's a partner situation and you guys are both experimenting together, that's a different situation. But if you're, venturing out into the lifestyle and you're meeting new people, you want to vet them. You want to, talk to people who they've played with, or, find out what their experience is. Are they doing continuing education? And what I mean by continuing education is, a lot of people think about the lifestyle as, as far as parties and, play parties, but there are plenty of conferences that they have where most of the conferences are geared towards education and forums. It's
Mm.
not just about, you know, tying somebody up and doing lewd and lascivious things to them. It's about understanding, the different techniques, different protocols, all of these different things. It's not something you just jump into and start doing stuff to people, because a lot of what is done can be dangerous.
It,
So you
Right.
want to
And
be
not just
careful.
physically, but psychologically, I would think.
Exactly.
Mr. Noir, I have another question. So what would be some characteristics that you look for in a submissive in particular, if you had to name a couple?
I would say that is a good question. It would really depend on what their experience level is. Honestly, me personally, I would prefer someone who had a little bit more experience. I have dealt with inexperienced submissives or first time submissives, and you have to kind of guide them along and be more restrained, because there is a lot more check-in that you have to do with them. You should always check in with their partner, um, even after you've negotiated, what you guys are going to do, and you have consent to, you know, interact. You still want to check in, but with someone newer, you have to check in a little bit more. So, characteristics that I look for is, just open communication, knowledgeable, really the types of characteristics that you would look for in a good partner or good relationship. It's really no different in the lifestyle. It's, those people that you can, communicate with and have open, honest conversation, and that you trust.
Agreed. Thank you. That was definitely well put. And I feel like there's a lot of people who are maybe on the fence. So what we want to do is just kind of bring awareness and listen. Like from what I understand with this lifestyle, there's people that practice it and you wouldn't even know. You wouldn't even have any idea.
Right.
Some people are very private and keep it strictly into their in their bedroom or in their household, and then outside they're your PTA mom or your school principal, and you wouldn't know it.
I get that a lot personally, is that, the people I do share it with, they're surprised. They're like, really, you? Because I'm really
It's
laid
like
back.
people think you're walking around like freakish looking,
Right.
you know, faces and, you know, wearing leather and whips and gags
That's
and
just the perception. That's the perception that the
exactly.
media has painted in society. But yeah, listen, you can be a regular vanilla guy and you can just use that just to kind of spice it up every once in a while. And sometimes it might be once in a while. It doesn't have to be every evening. It could just be that one night or that one weekend that you're like, you know what? I'm ready to dominate.
And I think that, people have a perception of what dominance looks like. It's the alpha male, it's, all of these things. But when you really drill down to it, a lot of the bravado and what we think is dominance in today's society and culture is really overcompensation.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Being
Or as
being
we
a
say,
dom,
toxic masculinity now, right?
yes,
mhm.
being a dom is someone who is knowledgeable, someone who is controlled. It's a lot more than just grabbing you by the hair and dragging you into the bedroom.
So I always, because I've dabbled in the lifestyle a little bit, and I always tell my subs when I do dabble in it that I want to be aware of you physically, mentally, and emotionally, because anybody can tie you up. That's easy. But somebody that can also understand you emotionally and mentally and connect with you on those levels, that's what a lot of women covet from a Dom when you boil down to it, and feel safe, feel that safety and feel that trust.
Yeah, I agree. It is not an easy thing. I actually had a partner tell me, man, I didn't realize how much went into being a dom, and I wouldn't want to be a dom because it's a lot of work and a lot of responsibility, and it is. But you have to uh, possess a lot of those qualities, or try and gain as much of those qualities as you can when you're involved in some of the things that we do. And in terms of you guys talking about people not looking a certain way, or there's a term in the lifestyle uh that says white picket fence with a dungeon in the basement.
Mm.
And I have been to play parties hosted by a couple. It was a 5-course meal, and it was a high protocol dinner. So all of the doms were well dressed. We wore suits, and the submissive served the 5-course meal. So it was like a white tablecloth experience. They served the meal, and the doms just sat and had dinner and talked. And after, it was a play party in the basement. And this couple, literally, suburban neighborhood, you would never know. You walked up to the house, everything looked normal, but they legit had a dungeon in the basement.
Wow.
That is
Wow.
straight 50 Shades
Well,
Gray.
Mr. Noir, I have one last question before we finish up our interview with you for the night. But how does the lifestyle interact with, like, having a relationship? Is it doable if your partner doesn't want to be in the lifestyle? Is it possible to have your cake and eat it too, I suppose? Or is it necessary for you to be in relationship with your sub?
For me personally, or in
I guess
general?
both, you personally and in general, I suppose.
For me personally, I find that it works better if my partner has submissive qualities.
Hmm.
The thing about the lifestyle is there are plenty of things to do and try. So I am not a person who would want to force someone into doing something that they're not into to please me. So it doesn't make any sense to me to do something that we're both not into and we're both not getting something out of. So if you're not into impact play or spanking, fine, we don't have to do that. Let's find what you are into. So for me personally, it works better if my partner has some submissive qualities and is open to experimenting if she doesn't have experience. Generally speaking, that would really depend on your relationship and how open and honest your communication was, and whether you had the freedom to experiment outside of your relationship if your partner wasn't open to trying new things or experimenting with the things that you wanted to. So it would really depend on your relationship and whether you can get a hall pass or get your permission slip signed.
And on
Great
that
example.
note, we will wrap it up. But thank you so much, Mr. Noir. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you.
we will probably have to have another conversation on this because this is a never-ending topic.
I know the spectrum's so wide, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me, and I am definitely available for round 2.
Thank you, sir. Have a good night.
Awesome. Thank you. Good night. Are you a fan? Tag us and share our show in your IG or Facebook pages in order to win a $50 gift card to a restaurant on us for Valentine's Day. You must be 18 and up to be entered to win, and the winner will be announced on February 5th, 2022.
Thanks for joining us today on the Relationship Cycle with Jorge and Nelsa. Do you have show ideas? Email us at jorgeandnelsa@gmail.com. Follow us on Spotify or anchor.fm for more great shows.